Hello, Jeando.
Hello, Kevin.
A long time ago, we did a video on the difference between theory, principles, rules, and instructions. And we've been talking about not how to do things that aren't according to feeling, how to do things using your reason. So rules seem to play a big part in this. So how do rules work in conscious guidance and control, and how do they relate to the future as well as the present?
Yes, it's a vast question. So for the moment, I'm going to simplify by saying that rules are just some kinds of principles that are less general in their application. So a rule is something that is explicit most of the time. You will see that it's not always the case, and then we have a difficulty. Rules are relations that we establish between different things. And when something like I would call A is happening, there is a tendency for B to come with it. So we establish a relation. It's not an association in the sense that it's not because we feel something that well we think that something is happening. It's more reason than this. A rule is something where you establish conditions and you well have means to check that the conditions are satisfied before you think that well the next event is going to happen. So it's in Alexander's books you will find different allusion to that. He's got this idea of understanding cause and effect relations. You could say that a cause and effect relation is a rule in itself, in the way we think. And so I'm going to develop this slowly. I understand that it's a very theoretical subject, so for this time I'm going to go slowly and expand on this idea of rules and how rules are connected with what we call indirect procedures. And of course, the big word is the word prevention. We have a technique for prevention, not a technique for cure. And all this is connected. I will explain. But next, I already prepared next video. And on next video, I will only take an example, a physical example that people can relate to. Because it's fundamental to living, it's breathing, and it's also because this is how Alexander explained that he started to develop his technique. But for now, we are going to see what we mean by creating reasoned rules. It's the fact that nowadays people are attracted by ideas like being in the present is a very strong idea. The other idea is ease, getting something, getting a result. People are very attracted to result, getting the result the quickest as possible. And you will find that when you start dwelling on rules and prevention, this kind of mindset is absolutely not appropriate. We have to understand that a process is involved, and you will see that a process happens in time. So time is of the essence of this technique. So at first it's necessary to, you will see, in fact, prevent the fear that people have of not getting the result, of not getting it, or not obtaining immediately the result, so that as they want to live in the now, and the now is made more or less of feelings. It's very difficult at first to alleviate that fear of not getting it. But in simplifying the scene is to say that at first it's necessary for the person to start to disengage from that immediate result that they want, and the best thing is to go and start to have them reason about causes and effects, and you will see this can be done very simply. So I'm going to start showing you how Alexander is approaching this idea. He says that when we observe the activity of a subject, there is a tendency for that subject to go directly for his ends. He realized that when an end is desired, it was necessary to rethink the procedure. So that's what this sentence is going to explain. He says when an end is desired, the procedure, of course it's a procedure to obtain that end, is based on the conception that first the manner of use of the self is no longer satisfactory, and two, that the associated mechanisms being misdirected are responsible for activity which does not meet the requirements for the gaining of desired ends. That this, therefore, necessitates the thinking out of new and improved means whereby the orders, which will ensure that the manner of use of the self will not be associated with misdirection of the associated mechanisms, and so prove a stumbling block in achieving the end. This is an indirect procedure, and as this has been already shown, it involves the inhibition of familiar messages responsible for habitual familiar activity, and the substituting for these of unfamiliar messages responsible for new and unfamiliar activity. So I understand that the first time you read something like this, you may be completely thrown off, because there are too many terms that are not defined. For example, I don't know if you understand the manner of use of the self, but at first I must admit that for me it was like a very strange expression. It was difficult for me to make sense of it. I had an intuition. But an intuition is nothing explicit. An intuition is very easy sometimes. It helps you to forget about the real meaning of the sentence. And you can finish Alexander's book with your head full of intuition, but in fact there is nothing concrete left in your hands to understand what is procedure is about. So I've worked the last 20 years to try and make sense of these expressions, associated mechanisms. What do we mean by mechanisms? What do we mean by mechanism being misdirected? All this is necessary. So the first idea is mechanism. How do you define a mechanism? Yeah, and so you have here an Alexander teacher that wanted to have lessons with me to do a postgraduate. She's already a teacher, but she had some dissatisfaction with her way of using the self. Yes, and what we see, she's seen standing, and I requested that she take hold of a little stick in her hand, and of course she's carrying the stick according to instruction I'm giving her. It's as if she was going to play the violin, if you want. And so what we see is that the manner of the use of the self is no longer satisfactory. The manner of use of the self, I consider in this picture, is not satisfactory. How can this be after training, full-time training for 3 years? We don't know, but we don't know where this person started from, or this picture doesn't tell us. This picture does only tell us what happens when she is performing an end, which is an activity of raising a bow. And so what we see is that there are different parts, of course, in the organisms. There are dots, as you can see on the picture, that are representing certain bones, certain points or landmarks on the anatomical structure. And so we see that, for example, she's requested at the moment to have the thumb on the top of the sternum and the little finger on the lower sternum. So the sternum is a bone that is, in fact, creating the very front of the rib cage. And we see that when she's raising the bow, well, she has to support the arm. Obviously, there is a function, the function of support has to be met, you know, because she's standing, so the function of equilibrium has to be met also. She must adjust the different parts in order to be in equilibrium. And so we see that she's doing a series of movements with the different parts, of which she's not absolutely aware of their combination. It's clear that to support the superior part of the torso, she's arching the back, she's protruding the abdomen. Well, she's certainly unduly lifting the front part of the chest. I say certainly because it's certain. We know that she's unduly lifting the front part of the chest because of the position of the fingers that are indicating that the top of the sternum is very far backward relative to the lower part of the sternum. So we are looking at the moment at facts. It's not an impression that we get. It's possible to measure this thing. It's possible to measure that her tendency, her habits of movements is always to coordinate the support of the superior part of the torso by having this combination of movement. And this combination of movements is partly conscious, so we can talk about a manner of use. It's a manner of use of the different movements of the parts of the anatomical structure. So when we talk about a mechanism, the definition is quite interesting because it's a definition that comes from a very old dictionary, a dictionary that Alexander could have read. Yeah, it's a Merriam-Webster 1883. And we see that they have an idea that a system of parts and processes in an organism that work together to perform a particular function by combination of the physical movements of its parts. Some people think that this particular combination of physical movements to obtain this support of the arm, this support of the arm that is holding the bow, is a reflex action, that there is no conscious reasoning behind it. Yes, but of course, Alexander teachers have a different view on this. They think that it's possible to start a process in which it's possible to change this end, which is the position that we see, and to change this end because the associated mechanisms here we see that the associated parts, so you have the mechanism of the arm, the mechanism of the torso, and the mechanism of the legs that are misdirected. And so we are going to say that these mechanisms are responsible for activities that does not meet the gaining of desired ends. The gaining of desired ends here represents not holding a bow correctly or moving a bow correctly, not at all. This is just the focus of the procedure, but the indirect procedure has in mind something else. What it has in mind is that the expansion of the torso and the patency, the opening of the airways. in the next episode, I will show you how we can reason this out, how we will see that the different movements that are affected to the parts of the torso have a direct influence on the relationship between the head and the torso, and therefore the conditions for breathing are not optimal here. Far from it. Without knowing it, the person is in fact reducing the opening of the airways, and this is much more important than the certain movement of the ribs. You have to understand that the first idea in the system of Alexander about breathing is not to learn to move the ribs. It's to learn to deal with what we call the opening of the airways and the necessary closing of the airways in certain conditions. Learning to open and close is much more fundamental. There are many people that are trying to do breathing movements, breathing exercises, without realizing that how they organize the torso relative to the head is absolutely fundamental to opening the airways. So we see here that the associated mechanisms, the mechanism of the torso, the mechanism of the legs, and the mechanism of the arm are responsible for activity, which does not mean the gaining of desired ends. The desired ends being, well, the functioning of the system. You have to understand that for the brain of the person to function at its best, it's necessary, of course, to get a correct ventilation, correct breathing, and the correct breathing cannot be met if the tube, which is responsible for bringing air and exhaling the toxic gases out of the rib cage, are not open correctly. So this leads to well, asking a question: why is that the teacher is holding herself in this way? Well, it's because she's been trained with a somatic technique in which rules are not really explained, are not really explicit. Nobody really... So there are rules. Everybody would accept, I think, this idea that in the Alexander technique we have different kinds of rules. Most of the rules are written down in the books that Alexander has left us. But more and more people want in this new Alexander technique, people want to get the result, live in the now, and get ease, get freedom right now. And this idea of investing in a technique, investing in a discipline, is certainly not in their mind, and so they tend to reject the initial Alexander technique as Alexander created it. So there is this notion of process that is part of the old system, and nowadays the way we understand process is quite far from the term process as used in Alexander's time. And so I found it was necessary for me to repeat this, that what is the definition of process that we use. And so a process was, at the time, an established group of acts carried out in a series in order to reach a goal. Of course, for me, this lights many lanterns, because groups of acts is a term that comes very often in Alexander's books. Carrying out in a series, it's also well, reminder of what Alexander was talking about. For example, we have here, well, a student that has had quite a number of lessons with me, and we see that he's also holding the ruler, but you can see that he's also pointing his index finger to the tip of his chin, right at that moment during the lesson. These are pictures that I take in the long distance lesson I give. And so what is happening here is that, of course, there is again the use of the arm in order to obtain a result. The gentleman is asked to point to a specific area in the wall in front of him, but there is also the function of support, but there is a completely different relationship between the movements of the parts of the torso and the position of the head. It's clear that in this picture, well, something strange is happening. Yes, you can see that, of course, the whole front of the torso is placed relatively to the front of the ankle. You could say that the gentleman is following a rule, and it's a rule that, well, which elements, which different objects cannot be felt. You cannot feel the position of a superior part of the torso relatively to the ankle. You can form a geometric idea, of course, explaining what it is you want, what is the activity you want to see perform in front of the video, but there is no feeling system that can tell you where are the different parts, because they are very far apart. They are absolutely well, at the opposite end of the structure, and so it is clear that this gentleman is using intellectual relations, representations. Yes, it's as if thinking that we want the front of the ankle, the instep, to be exactly at the same distance from the wall as the top of the sternum. You cannot see it, but his thumb is exactly on the top of his sternum, but his fact is marking a square angle between the top of his sternum and his chin, and it is seen that his chin is very, very far forward of the front of his chest. His head is very far forward of his back. Yeah, he's got the head we call forward and upward, and he's got his back as we call back. The middle torso is very far back. And so these relations are geometrical relations. But do not for a second imagine that the person is feeling these relations. These relations cannot be felt. Yet, they can be thought. They can be thought in advance. So, in advance of raising the arm to touch the wall, for example, or for raising the bow to place the bow on top of the fiddle, for example, it's possible to create a plan. A rule is something that will help you create a plan. The first plan, of course, is to remember the rule that the manner of use of the self is no longer satisfactory. You cannot rely on the movements that feel good to you. You cannot rely on the combination or the series of movements that you've always done because they felt correct, because they felt habitual to you. No, you have the first rule is to rely on thinking out new and improved means whereby orders. And these orders, in that case, I know them very well because I was part of this procedure. I gave the orders, and these were orders of movements. You can think different intentions at the same time. Well, let me explain this. You can, in fact, well, tell explicitly which intentions of movement you want to combine at the moment of raising the ruler to touch the wall. Of course, these are going to be one after the other because when you state explicitly some intentions of movement, they come one after the other. But the magic comes when you have all these intentions in memory. we suppose that a person can, in fact, explicitly tell which intention is going to perform at one particular moment and keep this intention in memory. This is not as simple as it looks, because of course, as soon as the person is going to enter into activity, the person is going to be, well, of course, feeling a lot of things. As soon as you move, you start feeling. And at first, it's a fact that when you start feeling, most, Alexander used that expression, you completely forget every intention you had in mind at first, which were intellectual intentions, which were separate from feeling anything. So when you start to feel, it's at first a real task, a real process to discover first that when one is feeling a lot, one tends to forget intentions. So if you had, let's say, 3 or 4 intentions to start with, as soon as you raise the arm, you discover that you're performing movements that are, well, not the one you wanted, not the one that were described by your intention, simply that's because you forgot the intention. It's like immediate. We are so used to not thinking in combination when moving that at first it's quite difficult to remember 4, 5, 6 or 7 intentions of movements for different parts of the torso in order by the combination of these movements to obtain this orientation of the structure in which it is clear that the torso is expanding, that the relationship of the mechanism of the torso to the mechanism of the legs and of the relationship between the mechanism of the torso and the mechanism of the arm is as clear as this one. So when you start working with the initial Alexander technique in the way I teach, I try to, in fact, prevent the pupil from the habitual fear of not getting the result, of not getting it right. People want the result. I'm trying to tell them that we are building plans, that we are working with rules, and rules deal not with the now. Rules are rules of prevention that deals with the future of their activity. If they succeed or not right now is not really the point. It's not important. I'm not trying to get them to realize a certain conformation of the different parts. No, it's not the point. The point is to start to understand that a process has to be created. And so we come back to the definition of process, established group of acts that has to be carried out in the series. When the pupil comes, well, the teacher, if you want, comes to have a first lesson with me, you can understand that the habit of mine is not to work with established group of acts. And to carry out established group of acts in series, this is altogether a new thing. Most people, when they have had lessons with the modern Alexander technique, the touch lessons, I can tell you, everything was done by the teacher. And they didn't, in fact, confront themselves with this idea of having more than one intention at a time. The intention to be at ease, the intentions to feel free are always separate. Well, when you start to want to direct the 3 different parts of the torso in relation with the different parts of the arms, for example, you're suddenly faced with a task that has nothing to do with the Alexander technique as you've practiced it in the past with your own teacher. Very often, students are, well, of course, students who have had loads of Alexander technique, modern Alexander technique lessons complain because they say, but when I was working with my own teacher, my own teacher was able to establish incredible conditions of use without me feeling any sort of tension. It never felt impossible, it felt possible. So there are two objections to that way of thinking. Is that, first of all, how do you know that your teacher was establishing fantastic conditions of use? And most of the time you will realize that the teacher says that, well, it felt absolutely light. It felt absolutely free. It felt incomprehensible and fantastic. Yes, but does that tell us that you were in proper condition of use? We know that your sensory appreciation is incorrect. It has to be incorrect. Because if in standing to raise a bow, you're starting to use your torso like this, if you're starting to pull the chin very far back to, in fact, swallow your tongue in this way, it's absolutely obvious that you cannot breathe properly in this way. So your sensory appreciation that was telling you that you had a fantastic experience of use with the teacher, well, it's just not we cannot accept it directly. Yeah, and how many pictures or films of modern Alexander teacher I have where you see that the teacher is organizing some very dubious organization of the parts of the torso relative to the other parts, that you start to think, wow, this all rests on feelings. And it rests also on this idea that the person, like in an instant during the lesson, has been like cured of all wrongdoing. Well, no, of course not. The habits of the person are still there, and as soon as the lesson with the touch teacher is finished, everybody will see, or if you know how to look, everybody will see that the person is again organizing the parts exactly as before. It doesn't matter that you had 200 lessons, 300 lessons, that the lady we were looking at, she had maybe 500 lessons, and she's still organizing the movements of the part in the same way as before. And because she has no notion of creating a series of instructions, a series of orders of movements that could happen together in order to perform a new organization, which is a progressive system of teaching. She has to understand that at first she will not be fantastic at organizing different intentions of movements. We expect her to fail, it doesn't matter. We expect her to examine how she failed. We expect her to control where she is in the process. We expect her to become an agent instead of receiving something that she's not understanding anything about. We expect her to, well, enter into action. So that is explained by Alexander. I'm not inventing here. And so the next part is what we want. What is the principle of prevention in this domain? Yes, is, in other words, that's what Alexander is saying. Instead of trying to remove specific symptoms directly, which is the method of cure, I endeavor to bring about such a readjustment of the organism as a whole that the symptoms in question disappear in the process and are not likely to recur if the new conditions are maintained. Principle of prevention. This applies in the case of some pupils. This implies in the case of some pupil a long process, for it means a gradual building up of new and satisfactory psychophysical use. And the pupil's cooperation in this process must be based upon reasoning rather than a blind acceptance of the principle involved. It's absolutely necessary to remind ourselves that when a lesson is finished, the pupil, student, is going to be alone with himself, alone with herself. She, as she learns means to organize the movements of the different parts in combination in order to satisfy for the activity and the function she wants to promote. The teacher is not there, and so the new conditions which have to be maintained cannot be feeling conditions of ease. Of course, you must understand that we want the symptom to disappear in the process, not immediately. That is, yeah. You must understand that at first there will be no disappearation of the symptoms. We don't care, and we don't want the symptoms to disappear too quickly, because if they disappear too quickly, you don't know where you are anymore. You have no means of understanding and continue to work, continue the discipline of working with prevention. So rules are complex to understand unless you have a concrete representation, a concrete reality. And so the concrete reality for Alexander is not spelled out. He's talking with complex or expressions which are not absolutely defined. So it's necessary at one point or another to make a stand and decide what are we going to understand by the word he's using. So, for example, the first one that comes to mind is the word use. How do you use different parts? What do we mean by using the different parts of the organism? And for me, that was a breakthrough when I started to understand that Alexander was in fact not discussing positions. He was discussing the movements that are necessary to obtain a position in space. When you look at, for example, this image, you see that, of course, there is a particular position. It may be strange to you, it may look bizarre, that's for sure, because it's so different from the habitual standing attitude of most people. So it may, but you must realize that this position in space requires, for the person who has incorrect habits of guidance, it relies on being capable of organizing different movements at the same time. The movement of the middle torso and the movement of the pelvis and the movement of the knees have to happen at the same time so that this result can be seen on screen. And so the rule that Alexander has given us here is very clear. It's the rule of the working balance of the movement of all the parts. So I'm going to show you this image, which I will find just now. So this is the use of the self. So this is already, we are in the second part of the teaching career of Alexander, and it's quite strange to read this and compare it with his teaching habit of trying to place the pupil in a position with his own hands, because this does not match what he's telling us here. He says it is important to remember that there is a working balance in the use of all the parts of the organisms, and that for this reason the use of the specific part or parts in any activity can influence the use of the other parts, and vice versa. Under instinctive direction, this working balance becomes habitual and feels right. And the point at which the influence of the use of any part will make itself felt will vary, and the influence of the particular use will be strong or weak, according to the nature of the stimulus of the end activity desired. So, there is a working balance in the movement of all the parts of the organism. You may want to move for example, the lower part of the sternum backward and the upper part of the sternum forward. And you may keep in mind these intentions when you enter into an activity, no matter what the activity is. You can ask the pupil to reach forward to touch something, or to take the arm in the air, sit down, anything. But while this activity is going on, you want the pupil to start directing the use of the parts that you have detailed in your personal instructions. So you will discover there that suddenly it may be possible for the pupil to move the lower sternum backward and the upper sternum forward as you requested, but immediately you will find other movements, like the movement of the lower part of the spine, the movement of the lower pelvis, going in a direction that is arching the spine. So, of course, there is something that we want about the orientation of the upper part of the torso, but at first we discover that it's only obtained at the expense of other movements that are shortening the spine from another end. So this is only the start. We expect these kind of things. We are not surprised. We know that there is a working balance in the use of all the parts. And the technique is just to discover that, yes, we didn't know, but our manner of moving the different parts has a working balance, and we cannot accept the old working balance. It's just simple. We see, very often I hear people that say, yes, if you try to lengthen the back, you will do something wrong elsewhere, and so therefore the only way is to model yourself from outside with the hands of an expert teacher. I don't think this is a valid remark. I do think that, yes, you will discover at first that unwanted movements are performed subconsciously by the pupil when when she tries to perform the different orders of movements that are required. But that is exactly the start of the work. It's not the end of it. It's the start of the work, and the start is a question. Do you think it's possible to move, as you've done, the lower part of the sternum backward and the upper part of the sternum forward, and at the same time refuse to pull, for example, the lower extremity of the spine backward, at the same time that you pull the lower sternum backward? Is it possible to imagine an antagonistic direction for the movement of the lower sternum and the movement of the lower part of the spine? We don't know. The pupil does not know, the teacher does not know. It's just a question. The only way to know if it's possible to create antagonistic direction while directing the upper part of the torso in the way requested is to make an experiment. The experiment may fail. We are interested to see how. Well, it may fail because we may see that when the person is going to start thinking about directing the movement of the lower part of the spine forward, when the sternum is organized in a completely different way from what is habitual, then we will discover that the person succeeds in directing the lower sacrum forward, the lower part of the spine forward, and completely forgot everything about the new organization of the upper part of the torso. That's it. We have an answer, and the answer is not for the moment. There are impeding conditions where the pupil is discovering that she has a difficulty keeping in mind different things, especially because when she is, in fact, performing the instruction, she feels really out of sort. She feels something pulling somewhere, a resistance in her own self against that new coordination of movement. It's very interesting to discover this. This is part of the use of that person. That person is exploring what her use is made of. But more than this, the person is starting a process of questioning and experiments. And then she will, we are going to explore how and when she will become able to direct 3 movements at the same time. And it will be as soon as the person accepts that we are not expecting a direct result, we are not expecting ease, we are not expecting to feel nice. Well, I can tell you the discipline will develop very soon. So Alexander continues with this idea, and the second part, he says, if a defect is recognized in the use of a part, if you recognize that the movement of the part is not the one you planned, this is a defect in the use. When you use something, you use a knife, for example, if you cut yourself with the knife, it's a defect. You know, you shouldn't be cutting yourself. It's a rule. You should not be cutting yourself with the knife. We should use the knife to your own advantage. And if it is seen that when you are asked to create new conditions for the breathing system that are reasonably good, this at the same time you're directing the movement of the lower spine backward to shorten the lower back, you can say that this is an incorrect use of the part in relation to the movement of the other parts. So he says, if a defect is recognized in the movement of a part and an attempt is made to correct this defect by changing the use of that part without bringing at the same time a corresponding change in the use of the other parts, the habitual working balance in the use of the whole will be disturbed. There is an habitual use, and this habitual use comes with an habitual working balance. If you want to direct a new use, you must expect to, well, discover a new working balance. Having the top of the sternum move in relation with the lower part of the sternum while the lower part of the spine is moving in the same direction as the upper part of the sternum, you have clearly a new working balance. And at first, Alexander is clear. You will see that he knows what is bound to happen. So he says, unless, therefore, a person attempting to make a change in the use of a specific part has an understanding of what is required to bring about at the same time a corresponding change in the use of the other parts, which will make for satisfactory working balance, and therefore be complementary to that new use that is trying to bring about at one point, one or two things is bound to happen. Either the stimulus of the desire to gain the end by means of the old use associated with the habitual working balance which feels right will in fact be so strong that it will dominate the stimulus to cultivate a new and improved use of a certain part associated with an unfamiliar working balance which feels wrong, or if the change in the use of a part is made in the face of impeding factors in the use of other parts, as happened in any specific method of treatment employed to correct a defect in a part, the working balance between the use of that part and the use of all the other parts will be so thrown out of gear that the use of the other parts will be adversely affected in their turn, and new defects in the use of that part will be developed. Well, two things can happen. Which one is right? When he says the stimulus of the desire to gain his end will be associated with the old use which feels right, so that will dominate the stimulus for the new use. So the person will want to feel right anyhow and find movement to feel right, and so it's not working. And the second part is not working either. Yeah, let's say the person is requested to change the use of the neck. It says you're going to think of the neck being free. Well, fine, you're thinking of the neck being free, but the use of the lower part of the rib cage, the use of the lower part of the torso, the use of the knees is going to stay the same. Or is it not? Well, an experiment is necessary. So we film the teacher. And I ask the teacher, well, okay, if your manner of dealing with this kind of incorrect movement is to just think. You know, just think is an idea in the modern Alexander technique where if you just think of a movement, it will happen sometimes. If you just think of the movement, if you have a pure thinking of that movement, things will happen. Things will reveal themselves to you. Why not? It's possible. Well, it's unlikely, but if you read Alexander, it's absolutely unlikely. Yeah, because Alexander is really talking of, in fact, organizing, planning the use of different parts at the same time here. And so what he's saying is that if you think of letting the neck be free, it will absolutely fail. But he does not explain exactly what could be, because we have either two things that are wrong. Where is the correct way? It's nice to say this is not going to work and this is not going to work. What is going to work is the question. And so you find that the only way is to go through a process of questioning and experimenting. There is no other way, but that, I will tell you, will work. It's possible for a person to, in fact, change mental perspective. In the mental perspective that most teachers of the modern Alexander technique have incorporated is that when the teacher is performing his manipulation, suddenly the feeling is new. The feeling is fantastic, especially if the person is really discoordinated, and especially if the person is under the complete control of the sensory appreciation. So let me see. I am checking whether it's possible to continue this or to break the session right now. I just want to add this. The fundamental principle in the re-education of a subject is the prevention of an undue and unnecessary apprehension. You must not attempt, the subject, to remedy any defect by doing something physically in accordance with his sensory appreciation, which is the outcome of his erroneous preconceived ideas and incorrect psychophysical experiences. This is quite funny to listen to Alexander here, and the following, that's the following sentence. He says the pupil's reasoning power is dominated by his sense of feeling, where his psychophysical self is concerned, so that he cannot even attempt to carry out any physical act, excepting the one that he feels to be right, despite the fact that by his reasoning faculties and practical proof he knows that his sense of feeling is misleading and is the outcome of erroneous preconceived ideas. We must therefore make him understand that so very frequently in re-education, the correct way to perform an act feels the impossible way. It's very interesting to hear Alexander talk about a pupil that has fear of not doing the right thing. And when the person wants to evaluate something, the person will evaluate with the feelings. The person will feel that it's impossible to move the different parts in the way they're imagined. It's impossible to think of so many directions at once, is another thing that comes very often to the fore. I'm requesting the pupil to move 4 different spots at the same time, and the person will say, but it's impossible to think of so many things at once. And why should I, when I do the movement like spontaneously? I don't. It all happens. It all happens. Why do I need to think of these movements? Well, because when you're doing it spontaneously and when you feel at ease, you're seen to be really endangering your vital mechanisms of breathing and digestion. This is what I want to explain in the next session. How Alexander discovery is in fact connected with movements which can completely impair and the breathing and digestive system. And so we have the prevention of undue and unnecessary apprehension. This is very often completely misconstrued by the modern Alexander technique, where they think that the pupil should be pampered so that no fear should come into the lesson. And it's obviously related to the fact that when you tell a pupil, look on the video, are you not arching your back? This is an aggression. This is considered to be a threat to the person. You're not fantastic, you're arching the back. This is not the point. No, it's just that we are looking at movements. You are directing these movements more or less consciously. And the result of this direction is obviously incorrect, don't you think? Don't you think it could be possible to direct this movement differently? Do you want to experiment? Do you want to start using verbal instruction in order to experiment? This is a process of change. When there is a process of change, something must be changed. It must be realized by the pupil that yes, there are things we want to change, and it's the direction of the different movements. The direction of the different movements at first is done by his sensory appreciation, but this comes with an undue apprehension. Well, this undue apprehension has to be changed as well. The pupil must start to become open to doing any sort of combination of movement, whether it fails or not. It doesn't matter. It's not by thinking, I'm not going to ask you anything that is out of your range of confidence, out of your range of comfort. No, I am going to ask you everything like this to go out of your range of comfort, but decide to take it lightly. Decide to take it with a pinch of salt. I have directed a few movements. It's not perfect, but this is seen to go in the right direction. This is seen not to go in the right direction, but compared with my old habit of relying upon feeling and fearing that somebody could come and tell me that I am doing wrong, well, it's fine if somebody comes to tell you that you're wrong. Fine, fantastic. You can learn something. You can expand. This fear of experiments, this fear of starting to use verbal instruction to direct precise, definite movements We call definite movements something that is a working movement, and we call also definite inhibition of movements. It's like another movement. Like you say, I want to make sure that when I go to sit, for example, I don't want to see the top of the sternum or the lower part of the sternum change relationship with a vertical reference that is the ball in front of me. So you must inhibit going forward in space or backward in space with the spot. This is pure inhibition. This is pure direction by conscious guidance, by ideas, and not by the feelings. So for today, this is where I wanted to bring you this idea that we can have rules of combinations of movements, but before all else, rules that we are not going to solve things piecemeal, releasing there, seeking freedom somewhere. No, we have to organize a series of movements all at the same time. And this requires means whereby not only the instructions, but the capacity to keep these instructions in memory, the capacity to connect these instructions together, and the capacity, of course, after a while, to bring the theory to a next step, which is building the bridge between theory and practice, making sure that in practice we are filmed by the camera as performing the movement as requested. Is that leading you to questions?
Yeah, well, it just became clear there when you Alexander's talking about apprehension. So apprehension is fear of the future based on your current feeling, whereas when you change to rules-based movement or rules-based acts, then you now have a plan for the future based on reason that you're going to do no matter how it feels as you're doing it. In the coming present, feeling isn't really an issue anymore. You're doing something according to reason. So it's a different way of dealing with the future.
That's correct. Exactly. This is exactly my point. In the next episode, we are going to relate this with the basic functioning. The basic functioning of an individual is breathing and digesting. And so we are going to see that the rules that we need to have in mind when we perform actions are always related with the basic functioning. And we are going to see that the movements that we perform with or without conscious guidance, with the different parts of the torso, have a direct influence on the structure and of course the functioning of these vital systems.
Great. So for everyone watching the video, you'll find a link underneath where you can go to Jeando's website and book a lesson with him, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks, Jeando.
You're welcome. Bye.